During the last weeks of our seminar, we have started to approach the concept of sustainability. We've tried to describe the notion of sustainability in the first place and also discover approaches in which we can make it measurable. Let us repeat what we have found out so far, and let me add some further aspects to clarify, widen, and deepen some of the ideas we started to discuss when we were still together in our real classroom and FABs. For this, I will first of all turn to sustainability as a complex concept, and by referring very much to ideas and arguments brought forward by Tom Kuhlman and John Farrington, I will try to shed light on the various dimensions of sustainability in a transdisciplinary way. In one of our presentations we had when we were still sitting in the classroom, the etymology of the term sustainability was explained. The name sustainability, so we learned, is derived from the Latin sustinere. This word itself is a combination of the elements sub, meaning under, and tenere, meaning to hold, which developed into sustinere. The idea is to hold something and give it support from below to stabilize it, to make it more enduring. In other words, when we speak of sustainability, we think of the notion of supporting or maintaining something. In other words, we think of sustainability as nothing different from survival, as we will see soon. In another presentation, we heard that sustainability is the ability of a system to exist constantly at a cost in a universe that it evolves towards thermodynamic equilibrium, the state with maximum entropy. So what would that mean? And what does it have to do with sustainability as survival? For this, we have to know first of all what entropy means. Entropy is the degradation of the matter and energy in the universe to an ultimate state of inert uniformity. Or expressed in more simple, maybe more drastic words, entropy is the general trend of the universe towards disorder and death. Sustainability, therefore, is the process and the ability of a system to keep on existing against the general trend of forces working against it and against its attempted maintaining of a particular order. Put simply, if a system is sustainable, it can survive. If it's not, it will be absorbed into the eternal nil and vanish. What is true for thermodynamics and physics is assumed to be true for social systems as well. The question in this context, of course, is what does make a social system? However, we will define it, and we have to talk about how to define a social system. But the question is, how can a social system be made sustainable? How can social systems, and therefore in the long run, we all as human beings, and the world, the planet Earth as our only home, survive against the forces? We also can see sustainability as an attempt to meet our own needs today without compromising the ability of our future generations to meet their own needs. Yeah, these are big words again, and as a matter of fact, there is a lot at stake here. That makes it complicated. On the one hand, we are confronted with a comprehensive issue covering the universality of our existence, while at the same time we find answers. We will have to find answers. We have to look for them at least in many little bits and pieces of our various realms and realities of our lives as human beings. And as the political scientists and economists and also other academics that you're aware of how diverse and complex our socio-political and socio-economic systems from the social system of the family, over tribes, over municipal structures, to states, regions, and the global society can be. In this context, the understanding of sustainability as the attempt to meet our own needs today without compromising the ability of our children and their children, of the future generations to meet their own needs. That's what it is about from that perspective. Sustainability can also be seen as a trinity of environmentalism, social equity, and economic development. This idea is rather widely understood, not just referring to natural resources. Also social and economic resources are taken into consideration. Sustainability, therefore, is by far not just environmentalism. Embedded in most definitions of sustainability, therefore, we find concerns for social equity and economic development as well. Sustainability, then, can also be regarded as the capacity for the coexistence of the biosphere on the one hand and the human civilization on the other. Thus we can maintain that in the early 21st century, where we stand now, sustainability generally refers to the capacity for the biosphere and human civilization to coexist. It is also defined as the process of people maintaining change in a homeostasis balanced environment in which the exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technological development and institutional change are all in harmony and enhance both current and future potential to meet human needs and aspirations. For many in the field, sustainability is defined through the following interconnected domains or pillars: environment, economic and social, which according to Friedrich Capra, so Friedrich Capra is an Austrian-American physicist, philosopher, and also system theorist, is based on the principles of systems thinking in particular. Subdomains of sustainable development have been considered also with respect to the cultural, the technological, and the political field. This leads us to another question. Is sustainability really a new idea? Given the current challenges we are confronted with, such as climate change and its implications, such as the rising sea levels, the severe weather phenomena we saw, strong rains, droughts, pollution, overpopulation, and so on and so forth. It appears as if thinking about sustainability and sustainable development are fairly new phenomena. Often the notion of sustainable development is attributed to the 1987 Brundtland Report. So we talk here about the World Commission on Environment and Development from the United Nations. This is also where the aforementioned concept of sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs comes from. So I mentioned that just a minute ago. When we look closer, however, we see that the concept goes much further back. Originally, the concept of sustainability was coined in forestry, where it means never harvesting more than what the forest yields in new growth. It was the word Nachhaltigkeit, which is German, a German term, the German term for sustainability, as a matter of fact, which was first used, particularly as this, documented already in the year 1713. So more than 300 years ago, people from a scientific and practical point of view were already writing about sustainability. And the notion behind the name, of course, is even much, much older, I dare to argue. Think about it. The concern with preserving natural resources for the future is perennial, of course. Undoubtedly, even our Paleolithic ancestors worried about their prey becoming extinct. And early farmers, when civilization reached that state, must have been apprehensive about maintaining soil fertility, for example. You just need to look into traditional wisdom to prove this. Traditional beliefs in joint thinking in terms of stewardship and concern for future generations, as expressed in the often quoted words of a Nigerian tribal chief who saw the community as existing of many dead, few living, and countless others unborn. So we talk about the intergenerational justice here, which is a core element of the notion of sustainability. Perhaps in reality we will see that empirical studies show that there have been always two opposing views of the relation between humankind and nature. One which stresses adaptation and harmony, and another which sees nature as something to be conquered, as something to take advantage of. Parallels to colonialism and imperialism as the ruthless exploitation of other individuals and civilizations as well as their natural riches are certainly not by incident when they come to our minds. While this latter view may have been rather dominant in Western civilization, so not only colonialism, imperialism, but also the idea of using the earth no matter what it costs. At least in recent centuries, its counterpoint, however, has never been entirely absent. There have always been voices to argue in favor of sustainability, just as there have always been critics of colonialism and imperialism, even in the West, throughout the ages. So there have always been people to raise awareness of creation and how to protect creation, how to protect a stable life on Earth in the long run. Yeah, when we talk about resources, we certainly have to come to the question in as far sustainability is also to be seen as an economic issue. Despite the focus on nature, the human being, humankind, etc., sustainability, without necessarily using the word, is of course a natural topic of study for economists. This might sound surprising maybe when you think about how both communist and capitalist systems used to, and often still do, exploit nature, but also human beings to the utmost extent. When you think further, however, after all, the scarcity of resources is a central issue of both economics and political economy. And it is also a crucial issue, as we learned, as we just saw, when we talk about sustainability. A famous example from the economic sphere is the work of Thomas Malthus, who published his theory about looming mass starvation due to the inability of available agricultural land to feed an expanding population in 1798. Again, quite a long time ago. Another theory, a theory on the optimal rate of exploitation of non-renewable resource. So think about it, non-renewable resource. That's one of the major discussions we have today. And this theory is still relevant today. That was formulated by Harold Hartling, an American economist, already in 1931. A milestone capturing the attention of global public policy was the report of the Club of Rome, which predicted that many natural resources crucial to our survival would be exhausted within 1 or 2 generations already. Such pessimism is unbecoming in public policy, which is after all supposed to be about improving things. Therefore, the report of the UN World Commission on Environment and Development, so the Brundtland report, the one I mentioned a bit before, was welcomed for showing a potential way out of impending doom. It was this report which adopted the already for a long time existing idea, the concept of sustainability, and give it finally the widespread recognition it enjoys today around the world. The question which Brundtland and her colleagues posed themselves was, and I just repeat it, how can the aspirations of the world's nations for a better life be reconciled with limited natural resources and the dangers of environmental degradation? Their answer is sustainable development, about which we will talk after talking about sustainability per se a little bit later. So their answer was sustainable development, and the Commission put it in those words. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this we already heard 2 slides ago when we were talking about the aspects, the dimensions of sustainability. Thus, environmental concerns are important, but the basic argument is one of welfare, seen in the context of intergenerational justice and intergenerational equity. What does it mean? It means nothing else, but we should care for the environment, and in that case, not because of its intrinsic value, but in order to preserve resources for our children. So we have to admit that's a rather utilitarian argument, not primarily a very philosophical environmentalist argument. Since that time, there have been 2 major developments in the concept of sustainability. One, its interpretation in terms of 3 dimensions, which must be in harmony: social, economic, environmental dimensions. And 2, the distinction between weak and strong sustainability. The Brundtland report speaks of 2 concerns that should be reconciled: development and the environment. They can also be interpreted as needs versus resources, or as the short versus the long term. So again, we see economic ideas being introduced here. Today, however, sustainability is almost always seen in terms of 3 dimensions: social, economic, and environmental. I mentioned this before. This is embodied in the definition of sustainability adopted by the United Nations in its Agenda for Development. Let me quote this here. Development is a multidimensional undertaking to achieve a higher quality of life for all people. Economic development, social development, and environmental protection are interdependent and mutually reinforcing components of sustainable development. As I said, we will talk about that in more detail after we have dealt with sustainability per se. So we will look closely to the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, but for that we really have to understand what sustainability is and how we can conceptualize it. The question then is, what are economic and social development, and how are they different? Are they different? Robert Gibson, a political scientist, says that the distinction is needed because material gains are not sufficient measures or preservers of human well-being. The same author also suggests that the three dimensions or pillars reflected in the disciplines of those who study sustainability, adding for good measure that a cultural and political pillar could also be included. The idea of sustainability having three dimensions stem from the triple bottom line concept coined by Elkington. As the term bottom line suggests, and that's a very tangible term, very visual in your imagination, it originates from the world of management science, and Elkington intended it as a way to operationalize corporate social responsibility. To the conventional bottom line, which in business administration and economics is profit, should be added care for the environment. Oh, that opens the dimension for the whole planet, as well as being good to people, for instance, by providing facilities for the handicapped and hiring minorities and so on and so forth. So the whole social dimension. So that gives us a larger, big scope with respect to what is meant by sustainability. So we don't just talk about clean air, clean rivers whatsoever, no pollution, taking care of the climate, but of many other dimensions as well. And they have to be all in balance with each other. And another thing is important. The goals of business, of course, are very different from the goals of public policy. Also, as in business, revenue is needed to cover government expenditure. Maximizing the excess of revenue over expenditure is not normally considered an appropriate goal for government policy. Government is not supposed to be a profit-making venture. The profit pillar is therefore translated as the money made by the entire country expressed as gross domestic product, our famous GDP. We've talked about this in international political economy, and whenever dealing with state and economy, the GDP is one of the important aspects. This then is the economic dimension, and the social dimension, people, is everything else connected with human aspiration. Equity, translated for example as income distribution, inclusion, commonly operationalized as the important employment of people, and health, of course expressed by an indicator such as life expectancy, access to medical services, and so on. So you can see science, operationalization, conceptualization always play a role. However, the equation of economic with money is a very limited view of economics. Moreover, the view is further restricted if we confine ourselves to the aggregate amount and not with its distribution or with what money can buy. So again, here we see a strong idea of political economy. So not just economics, but political economy. The question of distribution. That's a social discussion, a social negotiation, how that shall happen. GDP is intended as a measure of welfare, and as such it is very useful, but also very incomplete and biased. It is useful for measuring the amount of economic activity, and because there are relatively good data for it. but it needs to be complemented by other indices, such, for example, as the Human Development Index. These are subjects of study for economics and political science. So, again, political economy, but also for disciplines such as sociology. And there is no good reason to call one aspect economic and the other social. The sociologist would ask what welfare is and how it can be measured, whereas economists' task would be to assess, given human aspirations and the scarcity of resources, what course of action is likely to produce the highest degree of satisfaction of those aspirations. If there is good reason from a conceptual point of view to prefer a single socio-economic dimension, what of its usefulness to the policy analysis? That's a question. Let us consider a hypothetical project which scores very well on the environmental dimension but rather poorly on both the social and economic dimensions. This might easily lead a policymaker to conclude that the project is, on the whole, not a good idea. A two-dimensional approach might bring about the opposite judgment. Its environmental benefits come at a cost in terms of welfare. The environmental dimension may thus receive less weight in a three-dimensional approach. Indeed, some authors explicitly state the three dimensions should receive equal weight. Since socio-economic aspects are mostly about the well-being of the present generation and environmental ones are about caring for the future, this means the former become twice as important as the latter, which violates the Brundtland requirement that development should not take place at the expense of future generations. Worse perhaps even is that the contradiction between our desire for a better life and our concern for this what this may do to the environment is obscured by conceptualizing these two concerns into three dimensions and then suggesting that a solution is possible where all three are in harmony. Sustainability then becomes a concept that is equivalent to good and thus devoid of any specific meaning, a blanket concept to assure stakeholders of the policy's good intentions. The strength and relevance of the original Brundtland concept was precisely that it posed the question of how to reconcile one goal, development, with another goal, sustainability. And of course, these two goals are often, all the time basically, in tension. Therefore, it seems to make sense to use the word sustainability in the sense as it was intended by the Brundtland Commission, and not as it has been coined later by corporate types and policy makers. Let me quote the words of Robert Solow here. If sustainability is anything more than a slogan or expression of emotion, it must amount to an injunction to preserve productive capacity for the indefinite future. As Robert Solow has pointed out also, we cannot avoid using up some even non-renewable natural resources. But this does not mean, however, that these will necessarily become completely exhausted, which would be highly welcome, because that would be disastrous. In Solow's view, natural resources can always be substituted by capital, and that refers to natural resources which are renewable and those which are non-renewable. This substitution by capital can take the form of new materials, for example. It can be plastic for steel, or smaller amounts of the natural resources for the same amount of end product, because of an increased efficiency, maybe increased energy efficiency. New natural resources are harnessed while others become obsolete before they are depleted. An example is the substitution of coke for charcoal in the iron industry, as wood for charcoal was becoming scarce, or the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture in tandem with increasing population densities. So we can see transformation here, and we are currently in the process of transformation from the charcoal, which was just mentioned, maybe also from gas and benzene, petrol, etc., to other forms of energy production, maybe from solar energy. In any case, capital continues to increase as natural resources become scarcer. We do not know, of course, whether technology will always be able to solve our resource problems, and moreover, there are resources that we just do not want to lose. Maybe the blue whale or the Amazon rainforest. The question is, how much of our natural resources can we sacrifice? More precisely, we should pose two questions. What resources should we preserve at all cost, no matter what it takes? And to what degree? And for those that can be substituted for by capital, how much capital should be created to compensate for the loss of how much in terms of natural resources? The first question is necessarily beyond the purview of the economist. It is a decision of society what resources are to be considered essential. That is where politics and economists go hand in hand, political economy again. Economic analysis can estimate the cost of their conservation in terms of well-being foregone to help in the decision-making process. But that has to be done in form of a societal consensus in a political process. The second question was first analyzed by Harold Hotelling in 1931, the person I already mentioned. Hotelling considered that the depletion of any natural resource may be too slow as well as too fast. The present generation would probably not be better off if our ancestors had limited the extraction of coal to 10% of what they actually used. The progress of manufacturing would have been much slower, and even as it is, we are not short of coal for a couple of centuries yet. There is an optimum rate of exhaustion in which the social cost of losing the resource is outweighed by the social benefit which it yields over the period of use. This benefit can be expressed as rent, which in economic theory means the payment for a production factor above what it is needed to keep in operating. In an ideal situation where a mineral is freely accessible, the rent is the excess of the price of the mineral over the cost of extracting it. Hotelling shows that this rent is maximized if the increase in rent is equal to the discount rate. That rate is an important quantity in welfare economics. It expresses how the value of a future benefit compares to the same benefit in the present. Social discount rates, as used for public investments, tend to be of the order of a few percentage points per year. If we place a high value on caring for the future, we would use a lower discount rate. Hostelling's theory was taken up by the already mentioned Robert Solow, who proposes that these resource rents, also called the Hotelling rents, must be invested in productive capital so as to compensate future generations for the loss of the natural resource. That is also known as the Hartwig's rule. Such thoughts are the basis of funds that some resource-rich countries set up to invest the proceeds of their resource for the future. Well, the big unknown here is, of course, whether capital, so including technical progress, can indeed substitute for natural resources indefinitely. Now, that is something we have to take into consideration. That has to be part of the political discourse here. While we do not know this, technical process may provide us with an objective basis for the social discount rate, and that means the rate that we should use as a society to discount future as compared to present well-being. That basis, according to Randall in that case, should be the marginal efficiency of capital, which in the long run is equal to the productivity of society. And here we come back to our GDP, because the productivity of society can be measured only in terms of GDP, which, as we saw, however, is not a reliable indicator of well-being. However, Randall certainly is right in pointing out that artificially keeping the discount rate low for the benefit of future generations may actually do those generations a disfavor by misallocating resources today and bequeathing them a lower standard of well-being than they might have enjoyed. It's really not easy. And it will be clear by now how crucial the discount rate is for intergenerational equity and justice, which we propose to equate with sustainability. It could be argued that this rate should be zero, in which case the welfare of future generations would be of equal importance to our own. The difficulty with this view is that we do not know what value of today's natural resources, or of some of them in any case, will be in the future. How could we? A distinction should therefore be made between those resources which we are convinced it will always be important, for example, biodiversity as a whole, that is the case in this point, and those which depend on the state of technology, for example, charcoal or oil and the need for those. Sustainability can now loosely be defined as a state of affairs where the sum of natural and man-made resources remains at least constant for the foreseeable future in order that the well-being of future generations does not decline. Let me repeat that. A state of affairs where the sum of natural and man-made resources remains at least constant for the foreseeable future in order that the well-being of future generations does not decline. Ideally, when we assess the potential impact of a proposed policy, program or project, it should both lead to higher well-being and to a positive or at least neutral effect on the overall state of resources for the future, in which case we then can speak of sustainability. Sustainability then is a matter of what resources, natural resources, quality of the environment, capital and so on, we bequeath to coming generations. As we saw, some loss of natural resources seems to be inevitable, but this may, inshallah, be compensated for by increased capital. At least that is the argument of Robert Solow. Others, however, oppose this idea that capital can substitute for natural resources and feel that sustainability is a matter of preserving natural resources as essential for our future, our survival, and so on as such. Peirce et al. Brought these two different ideas together and contrasted them. There we can read, first, that the next generation should inherit a stock of wealth comprising man-made assets and environmental assets no less than the stock inherited by the previous generation. So this is about a stock of wealth that goes beyond the inherited environmental assets and accepts the fact of replacing some of the lost ones by capital-generated ones. The other opinion is two, that the next generation should inherit a stock of environmental assets no less than the stock inherited by the previous generation. So there is no talk of capital being able to replace it. These two views have been called weak and strong sustainability. Although the difference between them led to a heated debate, there is a place for both of them. That's what we can find. Some resources must fall under the requirement of strong sustainability. No possibility to replace them with capital. Others can be counted with respect to the weak variety. Which of the two it is will depend on the degree to which they can be substituted by capital. The depletion of fossil fuels, for instance, is an issue of weak sustainability. Provided other sources of energy are developed instead, we are not obliged to leave our descendants an undiminished stock of petroleum. Maybe they will never use it again because we found that other forms of energy, solar energy, hydrogenic energy, whatsoever, are much more efficient, maybe much cheaper, maybe much more protecting for the environment and so on. An extinct species, however, cannot, at the current state of scientific knowledge, be recovered and must therefore be considered a loss in terms of strong sustainability. And when we look into reality there, we can see that the Earth loses species, a big number of species every year. And that is an issue we will be talking about in our session on biodiversity and the importance of maintaining a large biodiversity, because this loss of species, the extinction of species, can have a very, very bad effect on the whole of the complex system of life on this planet. Strong sustainability can be seen as a series of thresholds that must not be crossed. An impact assessment, any outcome of a proposed intervention must fall within those thresholds. Setting such thresholds is largely a matter of socially and politically determined preferences, but also a matter of resilience. To what extent is a system, for instance an ecosystem, able to recover from shocks and stress? That's what I just meant. And I was saying a certain number of extinct species might have such a dramatic effect on the biosphere and its complex interdependencies that the whole nature, including the human being and including the civilizational structures we know today, are put to danger. Weak sustainability is then the yardstick by which policy outcomes within a space are to be judged. So when we think of strong sustainability as a space delimited by that thresholds, weak sustainability is the yardstick by which the policy outcomes within this space have to be judged. Given that the conditions of strong sustainability are met, the most sustainable outcome will be that which leads to the largest amount of both natural and man-made resources, in other words, environmental assets, valuable landscapes, other forms of cultural heritage, science and technology, infrastructure, and so on. Such an approach again is familiar also to the economists. In economic analysis, one of the constraints is always the legal system governing an economy, by whose rules an economic agent must play. Strong sustainability now is also an aspect of such rules. Thus, weak and strong sustainability each have to play a role in impact assessment. However, having such a framework does not mean that there are no more disagreements. For each environmental issue, there can be arguments about its sustainability. Generally, ecologists and other natural scientists might favor a larger role for strong sustainability. They are much more encouraged when it comes to emphasizing non-substitutable ecosystem functions, whereas economists obviously tend to like weak sustainability, as this gives them leeway to use their models. Strong sustainability puts them out of work. The strongest argument in favor of weak sustainability is that it allows the calculation of the cost of preserving an environmental asset as well as its benefit. For instance, if the cost of mitigating climate change is very high, let's say, hypothetically at least, sacrificing 1 percentage point of world economic growth annually in order to avoid 0.05 centigrade of temperature increase over 50 years, one might decide to allocate resources to buying land for nature reserves instead. The most crucial variables in sustainability assessment will be the thresholds of strong sustainability, the social discount rate to be used, and the valuation of material benefits versus those of intrinsic value. Strong sustainability has two principal arguments, which we may call ecosystem services and stewardship. According to the former, human life exists only by the grace of nature, which provides a number of essential services termed ecosystem services. We damage these systems at our own peril. The second argument is an ethical one, namely that we do not have the right to destroy the right to life of other species, or that we must preserve the beauty and the diversity of our natural environment for our own enjoyment as well as for future generations. So that is where we touch philosophy, but that is also where we touch religion. Think about what religion says about the maintaining the responsibility of us for the creation of God. In our last sessions, we also talked about the measuring of sustainability. We did that in a long and extensive way. A lot of discussion, a lot of mathematical models, a lot of thought. So I don't want to go into this here again. You have the slides, or I will provide you with the slides of your colleagues. But I still want to lose a couple of words at least on sustainability measurement. Yeah, sustainability measurement is the often quantitative basis for the informed management of sustainability. And after what I have been talking so far, we see that it is really important to be able to measure it. Now we have the philosophical, even the religious basis for that. But at the same time, we have the economic basis, the political, the societal basis for that. So we see how that all plays together, and that is why we really have to be able to measure sustainability, to understand it, to feel it, and to measure it. The metrics used for the measurement of sustainability, involving the sustainability of environmental, social, and economic domains, both individually and in various combinations, are still evolving. We're in the middle of it. Scientists try a lot, try and error, one of the things of science. So we will get new instruments basically every day. They include indicators, benchmarks, audits, indices, accounting, as well as assessment, appraisal, and other forms of reporting systems. They are all applied over a wide range of spatial and temporal scales. Some of the best known and most widely used sustainability measures include corporate sustainability reporting, the triple bottom line accounting, estimates of the quality of sustainability governance for individual countries using indices, for example, the Global Green Economy Index, it's the GGEI, the Environmental Sustainability Index, the Environmental Performance Index. We can see circles of sustainability as an approach, so that's an alternative approach used by the United Nations Global Compact Cities program and is explicitly critical, for example, of the triple bottom line approach. So also there we see how different schools of thought, of methodological thought in that case, are developing. The principal objective of sustainability indicators is to inform public policy making as part of the process of sustainability governance. Sustainability indicators can provide information on many aspects of the interplay between the environment and socioeconomic activities. Building strategic indicator sets generally deals with just a few simple questions. So we have descriptive indicators, for example. They are basically asking the question, what is happening? With performance indicators, these are related to the question, does it matter? And are we reaching our targets? We have efficiency indicators. They give us an answer to the question, are we improving? And we have policy effectiveness indicators. They basically ask whether our measures are working. And of course we have total welfare indicators, which can give us an answer to the question of are we generally better off. The International Institute for Sustainable Development and UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, established the Committee on Sustainability Assessment, the COSA, in 2006 already to evaluate sustainability initiatives operating in agriculture and develop indicators for their measurable social, economic and environmental objectives. One popular general framework currently used by the European Environment Agency uses a slight modification of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, DPSIR system. Here the environmental impact is broken up into 5 stages. That's also where the DPSIR comes from. D for drive or initiate environmental, P for pressures, which in turn produces a change in the S for state of the environment, which leads to I impacts of various kinds, societal responses. Policy guided by sustainability indicators can be introduced at any stage of this sequence events. We have to take care, of course, not to fall trap of a selection bias in the indicators, so we have to be careful what indicators we choose. There are numerous indicators which could be used as basics for sustainable measurement. A few of the commonly used indicators can be split into environmental sustainability indicators, economic indicators, social indicators, for example. So with respect to the first group, the global warming potential is an indicator, the acidification potential, the ozone depletion potential, the aerosol optical depth indicator, and so on. So a whole variety of indicators which require a very specific knowledge in the hard sciences to provide them, and then we can use them in our social sciences. We have the classic economic indicators, GDP, trade balance, local government income, profit, value and tax, investments, blah blah. Also social indicators, of course, the employment generated, equity, health and safety, education, the housing and living conditions, community cohesion, social security, etc. So what we see is that we really have at a whale a large number of various indicators that could be used for sustainability measurement. Because of this, proper assessment and monitoring is required. So in order to organize this well, nearly, if you want to put it like that, like chaos or disorder in selecting the metrics. The big challenge. Specific organizations have been set up with groups the metrics under different categories and defines proper methodology to implement it for measurement. They provide modeling techniques and indexes to compare the measurement and have methods to convert the scientific measurements result into easy to understand terms.